Nelson's, of course, a legend, and I've been wanting to meet him for some time. That meeting was facilitated by our next speaker, Anthony Von Mandl. Anthony plies a trade which has always attracted me for symbolic reasons, and that is, in the annals of Canadian business, we know we're a resource-based economy. The struggle has always been for us to modernize, to get into the modern trades. Well, broadcasting and especially production is one of those trades which is dominated by the Americans, and we've had a struggle over the last 30 years to create something in this country so that we too, Canadians, people who live here, could have some expression. Perhaps an even more improbable profession for Canada is the profession of winemaking. Last year we had a talk from Don Zeraldo, who's well known in these parts of the country for having created Inniskill in wine. It's no secret the whole idea of Canadian wines was like a joke not that very long ago. And Anthony has created a phenomenal vineyard out on the West Coast. You don't know that much about it here yet, but I think his reputation will float all the way over to the East Coast. It's called Mission Hill. It's a spectacular effort, and I'd like Anthony to come up and tell you about it.
Thank you, Moses. It's special to be here today. I'm a private person, and mine is a private business. This is not a story I tell often. As I reflect on my 30-year journey, it's always been about having a vision, about realizing my dreams. I was profoundly influenced by my family with a sense that inspired me with a sense of heritage and tradition. Let me take you back 30 years to the beginning of the story. I had a passion for wine, food, and adventure, and I had a dream. I noticed after I left UBC, I was 22, I was penniless at the time, that there were few import wines available in British Columbia, and those that were mediocre export wines. So I sought an opportunity, and I thought I could fill that niche and become a wine merchant. How naive. I went to Europe to apprentice in the wine trade because all I knew about wines was from my European parents, particularly my father. And after doing that, I sought out wineries that were willing to give me the rights to their wines in Canada so I could be their importer. Well, of course, no one in the business would give a 22-year-old kid the rights to their wine, so I had to find people that weren't in the market. That meant actually finding people that didn't speak English, I spoke other languages, or that didn't know quite where Canada was or didn't care. So I had to persuade them, return to Vancouver, found a great office, $29.95 a month next to the Greyhound bus terminal, 2 flights up in the back of the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. The bonus was I loved music and loved culture theatre, and I could go through the catwalks and see all the rehearsals. But I was absolutely naive. I didn't realize that even though I had wines that were much better quality and value than what was available in the market, the liquor board just wasn't buying. I didn't realize it was all about patronage and payola at the time. And so when I did find that out, I spoke out against that and was punished. I was blacklisted for almost 4 years by the BC Liquor Board. I was out of business. So I went to Plan B because I learned that airlines could buy directly. They didn't have to buy from the liquor board. So I walked in, 22, to CP Air, who were headquartered in Vancouver, and I managed, to my astonishment, to supply them with all of their white wines. And then I went to Montreal and sold Air Canada, and then to Max Ward, whom I supplied all his wines for 8 years. I was in business. I was a wine merchant. I then realized the white wine boom had started in the United States. All kinds of corporations were getting into the white wine business, And I picked up the phone and I sold literally containers of wine across America. This was easy. So I decided to get into the business myself. I needed a warehouse. Where? Los Angeles, a common theme today. I went down to Los Angeles. The only thing I could afford was a bankrupt Oriental carpet store at 3rd and Western. And for those of you not that familiar with Los Angeles, it's blocks away from where a few years later the Rodney King riots started, which is why the Oriental carpet store was bankrupt. So I put newspapers up in the store, brought in a surplus army cot, you know, the ones with the aluminum frames with canvas. There was a cold basin with just cold water with no warm water and no shower. And that's where I slept. I had a beat-up old station wagon. And I actually successfully sold wines to the top restaurants and hotels all over Los Angeles. But there was one problem. They only bought one case at a time, because if they needed more, they'd phone and say, bring another case. Well, Los Angeles is a big place, and I was fast going out of business. I was getting desperate. And then I got lucky. I went and I sold 80 cases, a single order of 80 cases, to a liquor store in Los Angeles. And I was really excited. Took 3 trips to the station wagon to get the wines there. I went back 10 days later, you know, with a bounce in my step to pick up the obligatory check. And as I came to the door, I saw this sign, in receivership. I'd been had. Another setback, or was it? Well, I certainly retreated from Los Angeles and went back to Vancouver, smarter and more determined than ever. Now, the system had begun to change. The liquor boards actually started to bring in tasting panels, a novel concept for wine. And they actually were starting to buy on taste, even though they were told to stay away from Von Mandl, he's an SOB. In the first listing meeting with the tasting panel, out of 12 wines, they decided to buy 9 were mine. All of a sudden, we became hot. The wines were being accepted. I started to do business across Canada. But here's the rub. The big guns came after me. The big distillers wanted to get into the wine business, and they saw my brands and my products. Now, I had a handshake deal with my suppliers. I mean, who was going to give then a 24-year-old or 23-year-old a contract? I thought a handshake was good enough. Well, what happened? They pulled the rug out from under me. They simply had more to offer. I was in Toronto. I had a little home in Toronto. Home is overstating it. But I was selling wine out here, and I received 2 notices. One from my top supplier in France, the other in California. We just got all these listings. We were so successful, telling me, dear Anthony, thank you so much for all the great work you've done, and our new importer is Seagram's. Well, I called my dad, and I said, who's back in Vancouver, I said, it's over. And his response was one of the key learnings of my life. He said, never make a strategic decision under duress. He said, always try and find a creative solution, particularly when it appears to be a dead end. So I got on the flight, and as we took off with the cheapest ticket I could find back to Vancouver, I reflected on this, and I realized that if I actually owned my own brands, instead of representing somebody, I owned my own brands, no one could ever take that away from me. And so determined, I looked around the world. It was a white wine boom. There was a huge surplus of white wines in Bordeaux for good reason, because they were terrible. They were insipidly dry. Entrepreneurs, you couldn't drink them. Or sweet Barsac wines. And I went and I said, look, could I blend the 2 together? And they said, why not? And I made a wine that really was very drinkable. And I put it in a really upscale package, and I created a brand called Saint-Jovien. And almost overnight, Saint-Jovien became one of the largest selling white wines in the country. All of a sudden, overnight, Mark Anthony Wine Merchants, my company, became the star agency, the star importer in the wine business in the country. And all kinds of suppliers that actually had been with the Seagrams of the world, I can talk about Seagrams because they're out of business, but that had been with those companies, knocked on my door and said, would you please take on our distribution? But this time, I didn't let them in the door until they signed a long-term contract. So all of a sudden, I had 13 people working for me. We were doing great business across Canada. To the outside world, I'd made it. But I still had another dream. A dream to own my very own winery. So now 9 years into the journey, it's now 1981, I looked to the Okanagan, a valley I loved and I knew that had incredible climate, very cool nights in the summer and very hot days, desert-like climate. In fact, it is a desert in the south of the valley. And in fact, the valley is even warmer, hotter in August than Napa. And in fact, I looked at it, and it is a Napa Valley with a 90-mile lake running through it. So I bought one of the 4 wineries available, the only one privately owned. And let me tell you, none of the 4 wineries were focused on quality at that time. Few shared my vision. My friends thought I was crazy, but even better, my competitors thought I was absolutely mad. And they made side bets as to how many months I'd last. Well, the first day, and let's have slide number 1, if we could. I went and this was my prize. The only thing I changed was a sign. The only thing that was great about this winery, it had the most beautiful location on top of a hill, Mission Hill, of any winery I'd ever seen anywhere in the world. But imagine my distress, my horror, as I walked into that building and that evening, and everywhere I looked, all I saw was dirt and fruit flies. Well, I barely slept that night, wondering if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. And a year later, we just heard from Nelson, interest rates were up at prime 24. I was paying 25% interest, and the banks were closed for business. Now, I was certain I was going out of business. Well, then I remembered what my father said. Here was another obstacle to overcome. The Okanagan is, of course, famous for its fruit. And I thought, well, how can I use that fruit to make a product? And so I thought about cider. And I realized I couldn't do it on my own. I had to find the expertise to make these ciders somewhere in the world. And I went to Switzerland, brought back the expertise, and created the world's first flavored ciders. We went in the first year from 18,000 cases to 300,000 cases in the third year. But it still wasn't enough. Wine is a capital-intensive business. It's actually, from a business standpoint, it's a really tough business. And as they say all the time, to make a small fortune in the wine business, you have to start with a large one. Well, I certainly didn't have that option. So I needed to find something else. It was 1986, and I noticed that there was this beer. It was a niche beer, became very trendy in Southern California, and it came from Mexico. And that year, the summer of '86, I launched Corona in Canada. Now, I needed to take the winery to the next level. There was a bit of cash flow, and so I took 2 years to find a winemaker that really could make the Okanagan respectable, that could help us make the valley recognized for the quality of our wines. If we could have the next slide, please. Here we are in Guildhall, which is where the Lord Mayors of London have been elected since the 1400s, John on the left, receiving the trophy from John Avery at the right. It was really a very, very great moment. I invited my mother and my sister, who were a very close family, to be with me, and it was particularly poignant because just a few months earlier, I'd lost my father. It was so special because the leading 600 of the leading wine authorities in the world were watching. And the story that is so amazing is that when these tasters, these master of wines, went and they taste blind, when they came out and they saw the result, and they saw it's Mission Hill from the Okanagan Valley in British where? And they didn't believe their scores. They actually went back in the room and retasted. They went in and retasted, and fortunately, we won a second time. And that's the true story of how we have, it's now known as the Mission Hill Family Estate Trophy, by the way, for Best Chardonnay Worldwide. Now, for the first time I understood my dream had legs. The problem still remained cash flow, because while I was on the podium here, back home at the winery, 1994, the roof was collapsing in the back cellar. And I said, don't tell me about it. He said, well, it could collapse. I said, well, we can't afford a new one. So I knew I had to turn my attention back to, thank you, thank you very much. I had to turn my attention. So a year later, I bought my first vineyard land. But prior to that, I just had used growers. It was a 130-acre property of sagebrush and a lot of rattlesnakes. You watched where you walk. And it was terribly difficult because it was this wild land. We had to build an irrigation system, pump water up a mountain out of Suyas Lake and then across 2 canyons to get to all of the vineyards. And it was a gamble. We didn't know what grapes to plant, and so we said, let's go for it. Let's plant cabs, let's plant Merlots, let's even plant Syrah. And today, out of our 14 estates, that's the vineyard that produces our biggest reds and the best wines we make. So, but the problem was, I embarked on this without knowing how to really pay for it. So I, at the same time, knew I had to focus on the profitable side of my business. It definitely wasn't wines at this stage. So it was 1996, and I decided to create a new product. And I created a brand called Mike's Hard Lemonade and launched it in Canada that year. Well, you could imagine, overnight, you know the story, I not only created a brand that took the country by storm, but an entirely new niche in the beverage business. In fact, there were fist fights in some LCBO stores to get product, not initiated by me. In 1999, I launched Mike's Hard Lemonade in the United States, and with humble expectations. I was stunned by the consumer response. I'd never seen anything like this since Corona. And I'm proud to say that last year, Mike's Hard Lemonade in the United States outsold Molson's, outsold Beck's, outsold Foster's, outsold Guinness, and outsold Sam Adams. Success could not have come at a better time because it allowed us to go and to select and to buy pieces of land up and down the valley that I believed were not only the finest properties to grow grapes, but the finest microclimates, the most diverse soils. Here's what some of the estates look like. Roll a video, please. The first, that was our planting. If we could go to the video, please. The first of these is a 630-acre ranch that we purchased last fall. I think it's the most beautiful place I know in the world. And you can see it's in the central Okanagan. I thought we bought a ranch with a 100-acre vineyard. In fact, it turns out there we are. It turned out we bought an animal farm because we have bear and we have elk and we have moose and cougars and everything. Here are the various estates. I really believe in order to make great wines, you must own your own estates. And the diversity these give us throughout the valley gives us the opportunity to grow many different things. Here's a 350-acre property we planted 3 years ago. And this gives you a sense of the majestic beauty, some wind machines. We have some 40 in the valley and a high-tech barn, and I won't get into all the technology and satellites and so we use. Thank you very much. But there was still something missing. I'd observed how in the 1960s, Robert Mondavi had created something very unique and put Napa Valley on the world wine map. And he did that not only by being the first to produce quality wines that compete with the best France or Italy had to offer, but he built a world destination winery that attracted first the skeptics from America and then from around the world. Now, I decided to try and do the same for the Okanagan. It wasn't enough just to make award-winning wines there. I had to give people a reason to come to the Okanagan. And frankly, nobody in the business could afford or would invest in the scope that was required to build such a winery. So I set out to build something enduring. If we could have the next slide, please. Set out to build something enduring, something that would reflect the PowerPoint. Yes, thank you. Something that would reflect the last 2,000 years of Western architecture and culture. I assembled an international team of architects and engineers and designers. Here on the left is Tom Kundig of Olsen Sundberg Kundig Allen in Seattle, who had worked and had built world-class museums, galleries, churches, chapels, and we started in our vision. Now, a year later, it took 6 years to realize this dream. When I went a year after we started construction, I ended up in the Dorchester Hotel in London, having breakfast for the first time with Robert Mondavi, by now in about 86, 87. And I showed him my plans, and I showed him the first shots of how we blasted the volcanic rock out of the ground. And he leaned over me, right to my face, and said, "Anthony, you're as crazy as I am." He said, "What you're doing is beyond anything I've done in Napa or anything that's been done in California or anything I've seen in the world. I want to be by your side. I want to help you." And that's exactly what he's done since then. He's been a great inspiration. So let me show you what this team has created. Our 12-story bell tower was a staircase. Our bells, each bell is dedicated to a member of my family, my late father, mother, sister, cast in Annecy, France. Here's another shot of the bell tower. You can see the incredible view overlooking the lake. Here's the attention to detail. I went and I spoke to everybody on the project, to the worker, and I said, "This project is your personal legacy. You will never work on a project like this. This will be around for hundreds of years. Your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will come and visit this winery, and they'll remember that you were one of the ones that built this winery." This is a 10,000 block of limestone. I had a master stone carver in from Wales last summer for 3 months to actually carve. Here you see it going in place with my mother and sister, my arms around them as we put this in place. Our symbol is a pelican, and in fact that's what is on this. This is as you enter Mission Hill. This is what you come through our entry arch to the bell tower, the loggias as you come down. Here is another loggia and an outdoor terrace. You descend into the cellars. And this is the first view of our underground cellars. There are 2 of them blasted out of volcanic rock. Here you come down the stairs, and you're now at the lowest point in the winery, the highest point in the winery. This is looking up. You can see the spiral staircase going up the tower. And here, now you're finally into the cellar. You can see the rock, and there's another cellar with a light shining through from the top. And it was very, very proud that we've been recognized by the world, because Architectural Record this month features 4 wineries from around the world. 2 in Spain as examples of contemporary architecture, 2 in Spain, 1 in South America, and only 1 in North America, Mission Hill Family Estate. Now, one of my passions and heritage is all about art and music. And here in our reception room, which is 28 feet high, is a Marc Chagall tapestry that I pursued for a year. And it is part of the collection of Paul Klee, a Ferdinand Léger in my personal dining room where we receive visitors. We then, here's the dining room at night. I decided to build a Roman amphitheater also to bring music, to bring culture, top entertainers internationally to the winery, to the Okanagan Valley, and put also together a culinary program. You're actually in an inside theater down below, and you're looking into our kitchen, because I wanted to take wine and food to the next level and to create a place that would attract and inspire star chefs from around the world. Well, 21 years after buying a rundown winery, I realized my dream. I frankly exceeded my dream. The Okanagan Valley has become known as a wine-producing region. Our wines are sold in countries all over the world. There are over 60 wineries today. Remember, there were only 4 when I started. I realized that my father was right all those years ago. Success, for me, at least in my case, came from what appeared to be the end of the road. Everything I created was an example of having to invent something new or at least put a twist on something existing. Every so often, when I leave my home in a vineyard just below the winery, and before dawn, and I walk up Mission Hill, and I go through the entry arch, and I walk through the piazza, and I climb the stairs of the bell tower, and I wait for the sunrise. And I reflect on what I've achieved over the years, and where I've been and where we're going, and what lies in the future. And I remember scooping up the dirt from the vineyard before we planted it, and I think about how lucky I am to be able to pursue something with such passion and something I truly love, and to have the ability to be able to, for the rest of my life, raise the bar for the quality of our wines, and we do that relentlessly, and raise the bar for myself. While I relish my success, I have learned to never, ever take anything for granted. Thank you very much.
Anthony. Sorry for the treatments.